Russian missile strikes have knocked out power across Ukraine, but just how much precision strike weapons remain in the Russian arsenal? And is Russia finally seeing some success near Bakhmut at tremendous cost? And even more insane, are the Russian propagandists spinning up an even more preposterous narrative than we've seen so far? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is November 23rd, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay. First and foremost, let's take a look. The major map change that we want to acknowledge is some minor advances by Russian forces south of Bakhmut. This is significant, of course, because Bakhmut has been a major operational objective for months. And you can see here that the Wagner group types have started to, I think it's even generous to call this starting to. It looks like some sort of fairly minor advances near this Andriivka. It's not super clear that this sort of broad advance is really part of any larger breakthrough. This is what you would expect if you just throw enough warm bodies at a problem. And as we've talked about in other videos, this is the sort of marginal gains that you're going to expect when your strategy involves primarily attacking across a broad front without achieving any real concentrations of force. You can see we've been talking for weeks about attacks that don't have gains. And so now we see, I'm going to say maybe a kilometer or two of gains for what's almost certainly a tremendous cost of men and material. I think the larger objective here, when we look at this more detailed map, we can see that it appears, let's find Bakhmut real quick. Here we go. So what I think this is part of an effort to maybe cut off this rail line. It sort of is puzzling to me because this rail line, it goes too close to the front line to be effectively used. It is a key supply route into Bakhmut when it's not contested, but controlling this area, right? You can see here, the rail line actually feeds into Russian territory very briefly, or Russian-controlled territory. So this isn't really an operational line that they're holding here. So it's not clear that this is going to change the situation for Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut, who almost certainly are resupplying via these routes to the north and to the east, like Chasiv Yar. But nonetheless, this is a reflection that at least their numerous attacks are indeed producing some level of result, even if it's at tremendous cost to the Wagner group. When we really zoom out a little bit, we can see that, of course, all of these blue dots here represent recent missile attacks. And you can see there's a lot. And throughout the country, power has been knocked out yet again. This is part of a Russian campaign to essentially punish Ukrainian civilians as winter approaches. By one assessment, Russia is burning its precision strike weapons very, very quickly. They are down to only 13% of its starting arsenal of Iskander's missiles. There's only less than half of their original stock of Caliber missiles, about half of their stock of KH-155, and only about a third of their KH-22 stock remaining. They probably also have depleted their stock of other smaller missile systems. Now, Russia can build more missiles, it's true, but high precision missiles are hard to manufacture. They require specialty materials, specialty metals and plastics. They also require special guidance systems. These are not, precision weapons rely in many cases on guidance systems to guide themselves to the target. And the U.S. has cracked down considerably on chip manufacturers who do business with Russia. This all means that it will be very tough for Russia to quickly backfill its missiles. Let's see. Russia is believed to have manufactured about 120 caliber missiles and about 360 Kh-35 missiles since February. But it's burning them at a far greater rate than it can replenish them. And it's only going to get harder as sanctions take their toll. Things are, of course, even weirder. Let's talk a little bit about this Russian conspiracy theory that they're bumping out. And I know you're like, Paul, how do you know enough to really call this definitively a conspiracy theory? Guys, the thesis, I'm not making this up, is that Russia is arguing that Ukraine is going to invade Russia. That's right. The country whose military is currently struggling to restore its existing sovereign territory is, according to Russia, imminently going to invade. I can't even make this stuff up. Let's see if we can find where this is. Okay. So the Kremlin appears to be setting information conditions for a false flag attack in Belgorod Oblast, Russia, likely in an effort to regain public support for the war in Ukraine. Kremlin propagandists are openly hypothesizing that Ukrainian forces seek to invade Belgorod Oblast, and Russian sources note that Russian forces need to regain control of lost regions to minimize the threat of a Ukrainian attack. So what I think they are talking about is this area here. Here's Belgorod, right? It's where Ukrainian forces now control up to the border with Russia. I just want to point out one thing. First, Russia technically already made this Russian sovereign territory, as you may recall. According to Russia, technically, Ukraine, has been invading Russia for some time now. And the fact that they are just pretending that previous pretext never happened is just a testament to the amount of wheel spinning Russian propaganda is doing right now. But when we look, we can see, I just want to appreciate for a moment the scale, right? This is the entirety of the fighting, but the serious fighting is concentrated basically now in this area, right? The entirety of Ukraine's armed forces, their entirety of their government is on a war footing to retake this portion of their territory. And Russia is convinced that they are in imminent danger of having all of this territory seized. I mean, as you guys can see, the Ukrainian armed forces are not going to have the capacity. I mean, the extremely impressive Kharkiv offensive seized what looks like about 50% of the territory of Belgorod Oblast. Right? This is just like comically preposterous and almost unbelievable. It's not almost unbelievable. It is. It would be foolish, and even ISW is characterizing it as absurd. And they believe its aim is to scare the general public into support for the war. It's sort of interesting because purportedly a Russian opposition outlet received a report that the Russian presidential administration carried out an internal survey in different regions where many expressed apathy towards the war. While you can't verify the report, and I want to point out that Russia has a long tradition of using opinion surveys to root out dissent, sort of like at your job, right? When you get an anonymous survey, it's funny how often your anonymous complaints are brought up to you directly. And obviously it's because nothing is really anonymous in this day and age. So the fact that even given the fact like a representative of Vladimir Putin showed up and asked these people, what do you think about the war in Ukraine? And people were so pissed that there were still a lot who were just like, fuck the war. Like, that's kind of impressive, honestly. and ballsy, and I think an illustration of the real frustration that Russians are probably feeling in private, and maybe have felt for a long time. But it's probably nearing a boiling point as more and more of their young men are rounded up and sent to fight. It will be hard, I think, to get, again, as we've discussed in previous videos, it'll be hard to get the Russian public to really believe these sort of things, given the fact that Russia's ability, the trust in the Russian government's accuracy and factuality of their statements are just, they're just preposterous. And the Russian people seem to have a very low level of trust. Literally, they are more trusting of random Telegram channels than they are of the actual Russian Ministry of Defense. And you know, that is what happens when you drop the ball and put out so much non-truthful information. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you. It is certainly a busy day in the Ukraine front. As always, if you want access to the combat video breakdowns that are too spicy, too intense for YouTube, right? I do all the breakdowns of those viral combat videos on my Patreon. Thanks so much to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who make this possible, and I'll see you all in the next one.